Okay, the time has come, folks. The long wait is over. Finally, we're going to talk about Sarah Michelle Gellar and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I have the perfect guest for it. My guest is Erik Fuhrer, who is a poet and playwright, and according to their website, a scarf tie aficionado whose fashion sense is part Buffy Summers, part Blanche Devereaux, and part the lion from The Wizard of Oz. And if you're watching on YouTube right now, you can absolutely see that fashion. I love that. I am. Hmm, Erik is the author of 6 books of poetry and 1 play. Their most recent book was Gellar Studies. I'm holding up a copy of it here for folks on YouTube. In it, a poem either celebrates Sarah Michelle Gellar or one of the many iconic roles from her career. And it's a complex interweaving of both Gellar's story and Erik's as well. Additionally, Erik has an upcoming memoir titled My Buffed Up Life. We'll preview it later in the show. Erik, welcome to the Gaily Show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, let's start with Gellar Studies and what folks can expect when they turn to page 1.
Yeah, so like you said, every poem in there is kind of either an ode to herself or an ode to one of the films or the television shows that she's been in. So I did a pretty deep dive into her work, and I've seen everything that she's ever done. So some of the films or TV shows in there might be unfamiliar to people. Buffy does not show up at all in this book. Buffy was reserved for the memoir, so it'll be a lot of Buffy in the memoir. But in this book, there is no Buffy. I focus a lot on I Know You Did Last Summer, but a lot of the poems, they are dedicated to the characters, but then, like you said, kind of veer off from that and kind of talk about my own life. So it's almost like I am using her work as kind of entryways in terms of images or in terms of sounds or in terms of narratives to explore my own narratives in the book.
Can you unpack that for me further? Because we talk a lot with folks here about the importance of queer culture and entertainment, which is why we devote our Friday episodes to that particular topic. A, because we're like totally, censored. And B, like it's so important to see ourselves reflected in work, our life stories. And here you are literally exploring your sense of self, your life experience through the work of Sarah Michelle Gellar. Also, interestingly, I Know What You Did Last Summer, but can you unpack that for that? Can you unpack that for me further as a poet doing that work?
Yeah, so I think, it all started, I was trying to write about things that were really difficult to write about, and I've been trying to write about them for years. And then one day I was watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I actually wrote, the memoir started first before Gellar Studies, and I wrote a line to Buffy, and all of a sudden I unlocked this. I started writing about all this stuff I wasn't able to write about before, and there's a way in which I love that show, and I spent so much time with that show, and I spent so much time identifying with that character. And it was almost as if, that character gave me like was a safety and gave me permission to write about all of the stuff that I was afraid to write about. Um, and then I had written the memoir first, and I was going to write like an academic book about Sarah Michelle Gellar, and then I started writing about uh, Daphne Blake instead, and the purple boots, and how much I wanted to wear those purple boots, and that became, a poem about, joy and about queer joy and about, just affirming my identity and thinking about how formative her like fashion sense was to me forming my identity. And then it moved a little bit outside of so it started off as like, kind of trauma work, and then it moved a little bit outside of that towards joy as well. And so Gellar Studies, even though it deals with a lot of traumatic narratives, kind of started with the joy of watching Scooby-Doo, and just, really falling in love with her and her fashion, and in a sense that I I identify with it, and I wanted to be part of that.
It's funny you say that because I think about how that episode or about Buffy allowed you to sort of unlock something, and I think that's something I so appreciate about that show was that, you know, it wasn't just a monster of the week, it was sort of a internal demons that we're dealing with on, you know, on a weekly basis. But talk to me more about the exploring and writing through or about trauma, because I know that is a very how you go about doing that can be very cathartic, and sometimes it can be like, oh, like re-triggering. And I'm thinking about when I interviewed Carmen Maria Machado, and she's like, I wouldn't like In the Dream House, everybody loves In the Dream House. And she's like, I would never write that book again. Like that was a one-time deal. I would never go back and try it. Like, and I'm like, oh, that is interesting, her perspective on that. Talk to me about your experience as a poet, as a writer, navigating and unpacking trauma in your work.
Yeah, so Carmen Maria Machado is interesting because I love that book, In a Dream House. And she also, I read an interview with her in which she said that she was unpacking a lot of the, you know, trauma that she was going to write about in the Dream House in Her Body and Other Stories. And that's a fictional book. And so she was talking about how she kind of had to explore it through fiction first, at least the ideas and the themes, and, you know, think through it in fiction first before she was able to then talk about it as herself and talk about the actual, you know, like nonfiction moments that related to her. And that was kind of the same experience for me. I was trying so hard to write this narrative directly about trauma for a long time. And it's hard to do that because sometimes when you try to do that and you try to force it, it is a kind of a very uncomfortable experience and it can be re-traumatizing. So Buffy worked in the same way that fiction worked for Carmen Maria Machado for me, in that I was able to kind of think about the character and identify with the character and think about episodes and kind of have like a safe space to sit in. And then
Mhm.
that also helped me kind of think through and identify my own trauma. And then when I went back to that, I was able to kind of oscillate between my personal moments and then these more fictional moments that I identified with. And that gave me like a safe passage in a way to be able to write about the things that were difficult to write about without. I keep saying like Buffy was like a buffer for me, but she really was, because without that buffer, without that safe space where I could oscillate into and then pull out of, I don't think I would have been able to write the book. And so again, like the memoir started first. I don't think I would have written a memoir, and then I wouldn't have written Gellar Studies either, because that came out of the permission that writing the memoir gave me.
Mm. Wow. We are talking with poet and playwright Erik Fuhrer, author of Gellar Studies and the forthcoming My Buffed Up Life. Let's talk a little bit about the oeuvre of Sarah Michelle Gellar. And so you go through so many, if you, like you said earlier, if not all of her iconic roles. I am curious about. I Know What You Did Last Summer. Like you do seem to be like there was some connection there to that film. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, it was a connection I didn't really know was there until I started writing the book. So, like I said, I had written the Buffy memoir first, and then I started while I was writing that, I started reading, watching everything she ever had been in, and I had already seen a good deal of it, but I had probably seen like 50%, and then I watched the other 50%, and then I just I remember watching I Know What You Did Last Summer, and I remember like again, and I had seen it when I was a teenager, and I remember liking it. I remember seeing it in the theater. I remember it being a film that, you know, I remembered very well. But I found myself like crying this time when I was watching it, and it was weird. It's supposed to be like this campy, you know, kind of silly um, teen horror film that, you know, I don't think was designed to evoke that kind of emotion from someone that I was having. Maybe it was, but I just remember having such this over identification with the character and skewing so hard towards the sadness in that character. And then Helen Shivers became the character that got the most poems in the book. So she closes the book and then she gets 4 poems through it. And I realized how formative that film must have been for me. I don't know if I can quite understand exactly why, but I think it has something to do with, me watching it as a teen and there being a lot of, my struggle with my gender identification during that time
Mm.
was pretty strong. And I think Sarah Michelle Gellar intertwined with that quite a lot for me. My, love of her as an actor, and then also my quest to kind of figure out, who I was, and that all kind of was coming together when I was watching that film. So I think it was a lot that was happening, but um, yeah, it was interesting to rediscover that, and I watched it like 10 times, and just the same reaction to it. That's the one I watched the most. That one and Cruel Intentions, I kept going back to.
Can you give us a flavor of those 4 poems and the topics that you're dealing with?
Yeah, so a lot of them are dealing with just thinking about her, like giving her character seriousness and giving her character, because again, I think it's, kind of can be seen as kind of a silly, like throwaway kind of teen horror film. And so thinking about her character through, like, really through the lens of trauma, really taking her character very seriously. And then also just, I don't know, like thinking about myself if I was in that position, because she like,
Mhm.
sorry, this is like a deep dive because I'm so close to that movie, but I feel like um, thinking about her as like the final girl as well, even though she does end up dying, but thinking about her that as kind of a triumph in her resilience.
Mhm.
And there's just a lot of poems that are just odes to that character, as like a pillar of strength and a pillar of resilience.
Something that I love about this book is the fact that you leave Buffy out of it. I think for Sarah, everything is just always Buffy, Buffy, Buffy. And here you're able to really look at her career, and it's such a personal way that you do it, which is really, it's really lovely. And so I highly recommend to folks that you get your copy, and we are including links in the show notes and on our website for how you can do that very simply and when you're done listening and or watching. I have more questions for you. I'm coming up on a break here, and I have a nasty habit of asking big huge questions and then going, and now we're going to break, so I'm going to hold that thought and we're going to come back. Before that break, I want to talk to you all about checking out our GLAAD Media Award nominated podcast, This Queer Book Saved My Life. On it, I interview LGBTQ guests from across the rainbow about a queer book that had a life-saving impact for them. And then we bring in the book's author and we talk about what it took to write that book and get it out into the world, which, as you can imagine, are very wildly different stories. So you can listen to This Queer Book Saved My Life everywhere that you stream your podcast. You can also find it at thisqueerbook.com. Here at The Gaily Show, you can keep the conversation going. We are at thegailyshow.org on Blue Sky, where you can tell us about what you think about the show. I get lots of DMs from folks who have some thoughts, which I love. I will respond to all of them so long as they're not, nonsense hate email or DMs. But yeah, you can find us there at thegailyshow.org on Blue Sky. You are listening to AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Welcome back to the Gaily Show. I'm John Parker. We're coming up on the top of the hour. It is our long-awaited conversation about Sarah Michelle Gellar and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Here on the Gaily Show, my guest is poet and playwright Erik Fuhrer, who is the author of Gellar Studies and the forthcoming My Buffed Up Life. So you wrote My Buffed Up Life before Gellar Studies. Talk to us about that memoir, because I want to make sure that folks are getting ready for the pre-orders for when it comes out in 2026.
Yes. So that book is it dives into a lot of personal trauma, and then it uses Buffy as kind of an interlocutor. So I talk with Buffy and I have these kind of hypothetical conversations with her, but I kind of pause from certain narratives of my own life to speak directly with Buffy. And often it's to speak with her about her own trauma and kind of to identify with that and to, she never speaks back, but it's to have kind of a conversation about how our traumas intersect, at least how I saw that happening when I watched it. And it's also a way to think about that show, as a trauma narrative, as very serious, as, something that, yes, there is the monster of the week, right? But there, Buffy for me, like, has pretty severe PTSD throughout the entire thing. It does take the character really seriously if you look at it through that lens. And so it's one telling the story of my life by having her as a kind of safety net in a way, but it's also re-examining the show as a trauma narrative, as something that does parallel the moments of my life in terms of its sadness, in terms of its intensity.
Hmm. I am currently on season 7 of the umpteenth time that I've watched it. I think there's that personal level that you're talking about, and I've also found uh, the uh, how well it responds to fascism and authoritarian politics. I've been really struck by that this time around. Something that I also noticed is, and I love how you're writing and talking to her as a character, because I think that of the three, the Scoobies, um, Buffy, I noticed this time around. I'm like, she is on point, emotionally speaking, when it comes to something that Willow or Xander are going through. It's like she always seems to like have the right thing, or even if it's not the right thing to say, she's like, I'm just there for you and I'm listening to you right now. Like, you see Xander being Xander, and even Willow sometimes when she comes back from LA and Willow's like, what the hell? Like, Buffy though is always there, just in the right way. Do I have that right though? Is that your experience?
I think so. I know some people feel like she's a little distant sometimes, but I think so. There's that episode where Willow comes out to Buffy, and I think that's a really beautiful scene. And Buffy is very affirming. At first, there may be a little bit of, she pulls back slightly, but then when I think Willow asks her, like, do you think something's wrong with me or something? And Buffy's response,
Mhm.
super affirming, and she just kind of sits there with her and she just holds space with her and lets her know that no, there's nothing wrong with you, and I am here with you. And I think it's a really beautiful moment. So I do think so. I think Buffy is always trying to calibrate to people. And then there's also, Willow does it too. There's also an episode, I think it's also in the 4th season. I think it's after that awful guy Parker dumps her.
Ugh,
They,
Parker. I
Will,
wanted to change my name after that episode.
yeah, and Willow is like, "Oh yeah, screw him, he's awful." And then Buffy says, "That's not. I miss him or something. That's not what I need right now." And Willow is like, "Oh, I thought you needed this type of friend. You need this type of friend. Okay, I'm recalibrating." And she like identifies that, Buffy's needs and it recalibrates into a different kind of.
Mhm,
And I really love that too because it shows like how much awareness that Willow has of their relationship and what Buffy needs at that moment. And when she gets it wrong, she just immediately recalibrates. And that's kind of what happens when Willow comes out to her as well. She says the wrong thing and then immediately recalibrates. And there's something
mhm.
about the way, people say like the way you finish each other's sentences. That doesn't really happen, but it's the way they kind of are able to immediately switch and be there for one another. And I think that's always something that makes me feel warm while watching that show. And I think that's one of the reasons I keep watching that show, because as much as it is, as I perceive it as a trauma narrative, I also perceive it as a narrative of deep care as well between the characters, which is, something I think we all want.
Mm-hmm. To me, the coming out episode, which with Willow, lovely. When when Buffy comes out to her mom as the Slayer at the end of season 2, and then everything plot-wise that happens after that, including her leaving Sunnydale, I was like bawling. And I'm talking like I got to Buffy not as a teenager, in like my mid to late 20s, and I'm sitting there just like bawling from the emotional experience of that, what she's going through in that final episode. And it is absolutely, all the lines are spot on of the queer experience, even though she's talking about being a Slayer.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
Yeah, I agree. That's a super moving moment. And then also, like what you were saying, like how people react to that when she does come back, and how cold and weird everybody is, but how she is very firm in her identity, and yeah.
The book is Gellar Studies. We have links to buy it in our show notes and on our website. You can connect with Erik at erik-fuhrer.com. That's Fuhrer. Stay tuned to this space, because we're going to have Erik back on for a part 2 to talk about My Buffed Up Life when it is on its way to bookstores and you can pre-order or get your copy immediately. Erik, I am so looking forward to that conversation, but I'm so glad that we had this one today as well.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, folks, on WCPT, for our Chicago listeners, it's Choose Views with Richard Chu. And up next in Minneapolis, it is the Matt McNeil Show. See you. Have a good weekend, and see you on Monday.